David, Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
It's great to have you both. You both have written about, one of you is working on a book, Josh, about a sort of proxy war in boxing. David, you've written on just about everything in politics and culture and literature. And we were talking, and David, you and I were talking a little bit about Caitlin Clark, who is the rage in the WNBA. I must admit, I do not follow the WNBA. I think in that regard, I'm not unlike most Americans, but this is what's all the more interesting about it, right? Caitlin Clark is this white basketball player who is a phenom, and there's another phenom, Angel Reese, who is African American. And this normally wouldn't seem like a huge story, right? But in some sense, this coverage of Caitlin Clark, sort of the whole Great White Hope thing, is playing. You all see this as having there's more than meets the eye here as far as what it means about American identity, about race, about politics, and where we are in the country. So why don't let's jump right in.
Right.
Why is this important? Why should people pay attention to the WNBA?
I've got a million thoughts, and as will you, Scott, and you, Josh. In a way, I think the most natural thing is to ask, Josh, who has written this book on, I forget its title, Josh, on Max Schmeling and Joe Louis. Was it 1934? Do I have the date right?
1938. Yeah, the book is called Heavyweights.
Right, that's a brilliant title, and I think sports has always been used. Big surprise, going back to the Greek Olympics, as a proxy war for cultural arguments. But I don't know. It's going to be a long discussion. But why don't you just start, Josh, if you don't mind, by talking about your book a little bit? Because I think that's not a bad background. That's almost 100 years ago, coming up on 100 years ago. And Schmeling, and I remember during when Cassius Clay and Sonny Liston were fighting in '64, what a crucial cultural proxy war that was, or Muhammad Ali, George Foreman. It's always been used that way. But anyway, tell us a little about your book and how you're interested in Angel, Cameron, Kennedy, and
it's
Caitlin.
Interesting you say that, David, because one of my favorite fights to read about was was when Muhammad Ali fought Floyd Patterson, and and Muhammad Ali was painted as the black revolutionary, and Floyd Patterson was painted as the representative of the NAACP and of integration thinking and a good race man. And there's a great story about, before the fight, Frank Sinatra having either visiting or I imagine he had Floyd Patterson visit him in his hotel room and told him, "You got to go get this guy. We're all behind you. The whole world's behind you." And when Floyd Patterson was knocked out, Frank Sinatra wouldn't even let him in the room. That was it. So I've always thought about that these guys, especially athletes, especially African-American athletes, are about as useful as the culture wants them to be, and no longer and no further than that point.
There's as you probably know, Josh, there are there's an anthology that John DeGotta edited about sort of certain kinds of American essays, and he includes, quite unusually, both James Baldwin's essay on, Ali and Foreman fight, I think, and then also Mailer's essay on the same fight.
Yeah.
Do you know those two essays by Mailer and Baldwin?
I don't know those too well, except to know that the kind of that's a proxy war in itself, right? Between those two guys. But I don't know. I am a huge fan of Norman Mailer's book, The Fight. Well, I guess it is. It's the Foreman book, The Fight.
I think it is. But what's so interesting for me is Baldwin is, to me, so much smarter than Mailer, and he basically deconstructs the mythology of the fight, where he sort of mocks the manly art of boxing, and I forget what they call it, the sweet science and all this stuff. That Baldwin has so many degrees of distance as a gay black man, a very small human being, is quite short. And, he's just not invested in the macho posturing of the fight. And I think Baldwin's, I don't know, to me, the argument between Baldwin and Mailer, I must admit, I'm embarrassed to forget. We could look it up, but which fight it is they're talking about. But anyway, I don't know if it's the thrill, but Mailer is terribly invested in this sort of ludicrous notion of the white Negro, et cetera. And he fancies himself some kind of quasi pygmy boxer or something. And he kind of leans into it, I would say earnestly, sincerely, and melodramatically. And I think Baldwin to me is interesting. I mean, I tend not to, there's a kind of canonization of Baldwin, which I don't share. I mean, there's certain early essays of Baldwin I just love, and there's other novels of his and late essays of his, which I don't particularly love. So I'm not a part of the like Saint Jimmy thing. Like, I think it's ridiculous. And that's its own problematic cartoonization of Baldwin. But anyway, this is an amazing essay of Baldwin. It's terribly instructive for our purposes, in my view, and that Baldwin has so many degrees of separation from the rhetoric surrounding the fight, whereas I would argue Mailer, in this essay, he leans in with a certain pugilistic arrogance into the manly rhetoric surrounding the fight. And anyway, it's sort of a long prologue of me saying, I hope that we're closer to Baldwin, where we're not going to just say, we're trying to deconstruct all of the rhetoric around it, which is just so damn interesting.
Do you think that this is just the tribalized context we're in? It just lends itself to this stuff where totally. you can't eat at Chick-fil-A, you can't do it. Everything is. I remember when Colin Patrick started taking the knee, and all these other players started taking the knee. They did polling, right? And traditionally, Republicans like the NFL much more than Democrats. And then all of a sudden, with the taking the knee, the polling switched, right? And now all of a sudden, Democrats love the NFL, and this was this sort of lionized cause, right? And then Republicans went sour on it, or it's like Russia, right? It used to be that the Democrats were soft on Russia. Now it's the Republicans that are. It just seems like that everything we have, including now women's basketball, right? I mean, I can't think of anything that would get me, and that people. I don't want to get canceled for being.
I know. Here goes your podcast.
Nothing could I could find less interesting, right, than the WNBA in some levels. But now this is supercharged, right? As you're saying, this is. People are finding it worth talking about in extended commentary and stuff. So, what's going on? Why should we care?
Well, that's always going to be that other element too, right? Like, and there's going to be the why we care and the tribalism and the whole thing. But then there's in America, there's always that other thing that lingers behind, which is that if it gets voices, if it gets eyes, and it gets people in the seats, and it gets money coming in, it doesn't really matter what the problem is. There is no problem as long as things are being publicized, and that's what we're seeing now. Is that, like you're saying, as you started off your with your intro, sort of saying that you didn't really pay attention to the WNBA, and up until about 4 months ago, very, very few people in this country paid attention to the WNBA, and now they're breaking viewership records left and right. I just read an article that said that the highest priced tickets ever for an WNBA game were just sold. I guess
and
one of the
20,000 people, like 20,000, I live between LA and Seattle. I'm in Seattle right this moment, but 20,000 people will go to a Caitlin Clark game against the Seattle Storm, or it's unheard of. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
And so let's dial it back in the sense of, I mean, a lot of people won't so one or more of us should go back. Like, who are these people? Like, for instance, I went, for some reason, it began for me when I was a graduate student at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And my first book I ever wrote is the book called Heroes, which is not a very good novel. It's my first book. It's my first novel. And it was inspired by my kind of fanboy crush on an Iowa college basketball player named Ronnie Lester, who later became a Los Angeles Lakers scout. But, so for me, I kind of glommed on early, a couple of years ago, to Caitlin Clark, because I spent 5 years in Iowa City, and I went to that stadium, dozens, if not hundreds of times. And I became this insane fan of the basketball team to keep me sane while a graduate student at Iowa Writers Workshop. And as I say, that my first novel came out of that experience. And I don't know, at first, I was aware of Caitlin Clark maybe 2-3 years ago. And also, like as a player, like I was never a very good basketball player, but I could shoot like crazy. I wasn't fast, but I could shoot and I could pass. So first of all, when did you become aware of all this stuff, Scott, about when did your attention start glomming onto it? Only with the Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark kind of conflict, or?
With regard to proxy stuff or
Oh, I was asking like Josh.
oh, Josh,
Did I
I'm
say
sorry.
Scott?
Okay, sorry. So, yeah, you
Sorry.
did.
Oh.
You did. It's all right.
Because I mean, we're going to totally, stigmatize Scott as the non-sports fan here. So
I had heard her name only in the context of a sort of post Steph Curry. There are now people out there that are shooting 3-pointers from the logo and making them at a ridiculous clip. And there's this girl in college who's doing the same thing. And so her name was sort of rattling around as a Steph Curry fan. Her name was rattling around, but it really wasn't until she and Angel Reese put their hands in front of their faces.
Yeah.
In the you can't see me gesture in the 2023 NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
When it started, becoming a social issue, because I'm ashamed to say that I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't, to be totally honest with you, I didn't pay attention to men's college basketball
Right.
until then. But it really was being a social critic who, for whatever reason, God knows the reason, I just can't. Sports is always the lens I end up looking at through society at. When this thing came out and they're in post-Trump or pre-Trump, whatever, a Trump America, to have this, this white girl with the ponytail shooting 3-pointers and this black girl with the long nails and they were
eyelashes.
The eyelashes and the whole thing, and they were doing these gestures at each other and just watching, again, not knowing their names at all, but it was like immediately after it happened, it was like white girl makes gesture. Everyone considers it a sign of her competitive spirit, a sign of how she really embodies everything that's great about collegiate sports and quote unquote amateur sports. And when the black woman does that exact same gesture 1 week later against that same white girl, she's called trash and she's called a bully and she's called. It was, I guess, what I found it's so fascinating about it. It was like the sheer speed with which this stuff now happens. I mean, these are issues. I always talk about how these are issues that are eternally recurring, which is why I was thinking about it in terms of Schmeling and Lewis. But they're eternally recurring, so they're old in that regard. But they're just, because of whatever social media, whatever it is, they happen at such a clip now that you can literally go from nobody knows who Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese are to they are now proxies for the great discussion in this country, the great argument in this country about who's an American and who can say what, and stand-ins for the lengths that we have not come as a society in terms of race. I think that's what fascinated me the most.
Yeah.
That these women went from nobodies to world famous, and now super world famous, now that they're both in the WNBA, in a way that it's remarkable. I mean, I would be very curious to sort of give them truth serum and hear what they actually really believe about this whole thing. I'm sure they're, on paper they say, I wish I didn't have to deal with these issues and I wish that I didn't have responsibility to talk about them. But man, that is just jet propulsion in terms of their level of fame and their level of notoriety.
So, Scott, you have an interesting perspective, Scott, as someone who's not that invested in these issues. You haven't written about them. You're obviously interested in American history and culture and race. I mean, Josh and I could just keep talking, but do you want to rejigger the conversation, Scott, in the sense that, I just got a million anecdotes, a million things. Like there's this meme now, this T-shirt of people saying everyone watches women's sports, which is the old phrase used to be no one watches women's sports. And so now I saw on the internet, a black woman wearing this T-shirt, everyone watches women's sports. So that, there's so many layers of complexity. One thing, I'm trying to think of where to even take this. A big part of it, is this was a slowly burning fuse, in the sense that a year ago, as Josh said, there was this bit of a conflict between Reese and Clark. I think it was in the finals or semifinals of the NCAA tournament. And then it kind of dissipated a little bit, over time. And then, of course, during this past year, Caitlin Clark's star has risen considerably as she became the, preeminent player. And then I think a big part of it was that there's this thing now in college sports called NIL, name, image, and likeness, in which the players are paid astronomical amounts of money, millions of dollars, to endorse or pseudo endorse various products. Or, you get paid $1 million to be the spokeswoman for the Iowa Farming Council or whatever. What's that sound? What are those? Some birds in Josh's backyard?
Oh, can you hear the birds?
Oh yeah, I was just it's no big deal.
Okay,
I was just
yeah.
curious. But anyway, what's my point? I mean, there's so many issues to untangle. One is the phenomenal amount. I think Caitlin Clark signed an endorsement deal, as most of your viewers would know, and as Josh certainly knows, with, I believe, Nike for something like $20+ million. Isn't it in that area? 10, 15, $20 million?
I think it is, yeah.
And that, it's kind of the way, there. And so also she's heterosexual. She's from Iowa. She wears a ponytail. She's terribly earnest, terribly sincere, almost like she's Jimmy Chitwood from Hoosiers, or she's and even her name, Caitlin Clark. I mean, it sounds a little bit like what was Super's name?
Clark Kent.
Clark Kent. It has an unmistakable, and there's all these videos of Caitlin Clark's dad. I don't know if he was a high school coach or something, but she spends all summer not smoking reefer on the Baltimore streets, which is like the mythology around Angel Reese is just terribly proud of her street cred. And whereas Caitlin Clark is she's just talk about make America great again. It's this great white female captivity narrative that we're going to try and protect Caitlin Clark from violation on some level. There are so many other layers to it, but I think one thing that's really powerful is just Caitlin Clark as Clark Kent. She has this almost amazing ability to shoot these so-called logo threes from 30 feet. And she has, sort of, I would argue on some level, she's not like crazily physically gifted. I mean, is gifted enough to play high school, college, and now pro sports. And she's now, kind of a star in the WNBA. She's not like dominant. But anyway, what's my key point? My key point is that a big part of this, to anyone who follows it, is that the WNBA is, I don't know what percentage Black, probably 40 to 50% Black.
I think it's about 65.
65, and it's about 28 or 30% lesbian, sort of out lesbians. And so into this, relatively Black league, this relatively queer league, and that so many of the fans are, are gay, that here's this girl, this young woman who's 22 or something, who's from Iowa of all places, which has become this hugely red state. She's very much her father's daughter who taught her how to play, terribly earnest, and so she has very much old school white boy, white girl skills on the court. And she is heterosexual. She has a boyfriend, and she's making an enormous amounts of money. I mean, tens of millions of dollars through salary, endorsements, name, image, likeness. I mean, this is all stuff Josh knows, but just to fill in the viewers, this is just the first few levels. But she's from Iowa, she's straight, has old-fashioned skills, and you could argue old-fashioned virtues, old-fashioned strengths. She's from the middle of the country, from middle America. I believe Angel Reese is from Baltimore. Is that right, Josh?
No, I have no idea where Angel Reese is from.
I don't know. I think she's from Baltimore. And but anyway, and she But anyway, I'm just trying to load up some information. I don't know if Scott, if you want to push back against any of this, or Josh, if you want to pull any of these threads. I have many more points to get to, but this is just the very
At
beginning.
what point does she go to a Trump rally?
Clark,
I mean,
see,
yeah.
that's
what
the flip.
point?
That's
at
the
what-
flip. Is
you
that
know,
she's not that person.
right?
She is not. She goes, stop using me for your own agendas. And she actually seems fairly, she's not. I mean, what's your sense of that, Josh? Of what? Because I mean, my immediate response to Scott's funny question is, those aren't her politics at all. If anything, she's apolitical, but she's been playing predominantly black sports, and she was 6 years old. I'd be shocked if she has. I don't know what her politics are.
Yeah, I don't know what her politics are. I think she's done a very good job of being explicitly apolitical in that regard. She might actually be apolitical in that regard. She could be one of these people that, like you're saying, like one of these people who's like a piano player who's raised in a, like kept like a flower by her parents and raised in a particular way and kept away from the world.
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if she had that sort of savant-like quality. But it's interesting when you brought up that she said, "Don't use me for your political agenda," because even getting her to say that was pulling teeth. I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah.
She was well. It wasn't until well into her time in the WNBA. She was called out a couple weeks ago by Dejanay Carrington, who's a player for the Connecticut Sun, who called her out because she said every time she's been asked these questions since the beginning, since she first got into it with Angel Reese, she's been asked from the beginning, how do you feel about people using your name and trying to protect you online and trying to protect you on social media and using racist or misogynist or anti-queer comments and essentially relating them to you. And she's always said, I don't go online. I don't go on social media. It's not me. It's not me. And then this woman, Dejanay Carrington, I think very rightfully so, said, she said, quote, she said, silence is a luxury. She said, like, you're allowed to, it's easy for you to be silent. It's easy for you to say that you don't look at social media. But for us, she played a game. I guess the Sun played a game against the Indiana Sky. No, that's
The
not
Indiana Fever. Yeah.
The Fever, right? The Indiana Fever, and she got into it. Carrington and Clark got into it in the way that basketball players get into it during the course of a game. And of course, Carrington went home and she looked on social media and she was being attacked for her blackness, and she was being attacked for her being a woman, and she was being attacked for playing too rough, and she was being attacked for all these different things, and they were using epithets and the whole thing. So Carrington very rightfully went on and said, you can't plead silence anymore. You can't plead ignorance. You can't say that you don't notice what's going on. And it was only after that Caitlin Clark actually came out and said, don't use me for your agendas and the whole thing, which is great. It struck me as being sort of kind of milquetoast. It struck me as pretty weak stuff, what she said. But the fact that she said it at all was probably a good thing. But she was sort of forced into that. But you're right, David. I don't know how it would be interesting considering how liberal and how progressive the WNBA is. I don't know how a woman like that could sort of survive if she came out explicitly for Trump, if she went to a Trump rally or something like that. I mean, far more than even the NBA. The WNBA is explicitly political, and they had they shut down. Who was the woman who was running for Senate from Georgia and owned a WNBA team, and she was essentially chased out of the league, and had to give up her ownership stake because she was a Trump supporter. So I have not heard Caitlin Clark say anything that would express that she's one way or another on the political spectrum, but I can't imagine she would come out on the right, just given the context that she has to live in every day, not just in terms of the people she plays against, but the people she plays with. I mean,
part of it is, and there's capitalism here too, where she's, the infamous Michael Jordan line is, Republicans buy Nikes too, or Republicans buy tennis shoes as well. And he kind of maintained, even to this day, a relatively studious, neutral position. But I think it gets more complicated, I think, than we're letting on, in the sense that I was trying to explain this to someone, and the person was thinking I was somehow equating Caitlin Clark with sort of Trump, and maybe Angel Reese with, say, I don't know what, Black Lives Matter or something. I don't know what, but I was saying, like, no, it's so much more complicated than that. And to me, it's more confusing in that, Trump, whatever his scare tactics or his crazy performative, I think fallen, he had a performative genius, which I tried to write or did write a book about. And in a way, my forthcoming book is still about that, how we got here. And anyway, the point I'm trying to get to, which I haven't worked out totally, that performatively and strategically and psychically, metaphysically, Trump is much more like Angel Reese than he is like Caitlin Clark, in the sense that Angel Reese, part of her charm is that she's often very funny, and she says what's on her mind, and she, as they say, says the silent part aloud. Like there was a call that went against her, and I actually thought it was a flagrant one. I think that was a fair call. It shouldn't have been a flagrant two, but she clearly fouled Caitlin Clark harder than she had to, trying to block this shot. So at first it was just called a regular foul. Then it was upgraded afterward to a flagrant one, which strikes me as correct, that she saw it as a chance to whap her nemesis on the top of the head.
Sure.
I think that was probably correct. So anyway, afterwards she had this something like, well, I guess certain people have a special whistle, which was kind of an amazing line, because it kind of punned, at least to my ears, on dog whistles. There's a dog whistle for race. I don't know if she was consciously uploading that, but she almost always leads with her chin, with a certain amount of verbal fisticuffs, that she reminds me a little bit of someone I did. I've done at least 3 books on Black athletes or athletes of color. My book about Ichiro, my book about Gary Payton, and my movie about Marshawn Lynch are all about people, especially the book on Payton and the film on Lynch, are about people, Black athletes, in this case, 2 players from Oakland, who, have a kind of amazing verbal daring do. And so in any case, Trump and Angel Reese share stylistic affinity to a very strong degree, in the sense that Angel Reese, is very performatively vain. Like she's like, she wears, very strong costume. Then she says, I can't believe that you're sexualizing me, but it's very funny. And she's very hard to pin down. And she's very, very interesting in her. And in a way, you could say a lot of what Trump has done is he's learned from WWE how to play the heel, or play, kayfabe, or, to play, the bad guy. And Angel Reese is, I think, I don't know, she's a very young woman, but she's playing a bit of a nemesis to, the rather vanilla Caitlin Clark. And then Caitlin Clark, to me, is complicated because who is she like? I would say she reminds me a little bit of Biden, actually, in the sense that she's so tongue-tied. Just as Biden doesn't know what to say about anything, partly I'm interested, I had a stutter as a child, still have remnants of it now occasionally. And I'm hugely interested in Biden's speech impediment and the way it's formed his personality. He's so afraid of his own shadow. Everything, he can't say boo without having it vetted by 7 lawyers. And there's something about Caitlin Clark, I think, you can tell how nervous she is about everything that she says. And I think in a way she's a proxy for how completely tongue-tied and mortified, it's rather a broad term, but white people are. Like straight white people don't know what to say anymore about anything. And I would include myself among them. Like, what can anyone say about anything without, in a way, and I don't know what my politics are, kind of center left or left. I don't know how to describe them. They seem to change daily. But In any case, I do think it's much more complicated than. I mean, nobody's a hero here. Nobody's a villain. Everyone's trying to get paid. Everyone's performing a lot. And I think, to me, I don't know if you would push back against a lot of this, Josh, but to me, it gets very, very interesting and much more layered when one acknowledges that there are these Trumpian affinities with Angel Reese, in the sense that he's performatively transgressive, obviously, and Angel Reese, from a very different perspective, is that too. She's very aware of monetizing being the force against Caitlin Clark, in a way rather like Trump's whole game is, I'm gonna push back against liberal elites or whatever. And then it gets complicated because, of course, Caitlin Clark is middle America, which in a way is Biden, Delaware Joe and ordinary Joe. He's about as ordinary a human being as one could possibly imagine. He's just like, there is nothing exceptional about Joe Biden. He's middle America. Like, he's utterly of average intelligence at best. He's, tongue-tied. He doesn't know what to say. Anyway, these are just some thoughts I'm playing with that Scott and I talk about a lot. Scott, do you have any thoughts on this, or Josh, do you want to push back against any of this? Or
I will only say I hadn't thought about that angle at all, and I love the idea of, though it would cause all kinds of trouble, I'm sure. I love the idea of Angel Reese somehow being more simpatico and more sort of in line with a Trump type figure than, because I mean it really does skew the sort of typical, the affinities.
It's not easy.
I hadn't thought about.
Like, it's not that she votes for Trump. I have no idea what these. I don't know. But that, like,
you're right. She's extremely extremely savvy with social media. She knows how to.
I don't follow anyone on social, so.
Yeah, I mean, she
on social.
Oh, she does exactly what you're talking about. I mean, she's great at. I mean, she, in a way that I don't think Caitlin Clark ever would.
No.
Puts pictures of herself up in provocative clothing or saying provocative things.
Yeah.
She was at she went to the opening of the Met Gala. I think
was she
before.
really at like that?
She was there.
Was she a guest at the Met Gala? See, I think Caitlin Clark would be like, "Where's a basketball hoop?" Because you have to pay $75,000 to go to the Met Gala, I guess.
Well, that's what I think. I think that's exactly right. I think that, like we were saying, I think Caitlin Clark exists entirely as a basketball player.
Yeah,
it's almost like an autistic thing.
Totally.
Whereas Angel Reese exists entirely in the world, and in the world of 2024. So she went to this Met Gala thing, and I guess she was a day or two before she was supposed to play either a big game or some sort of open workout, maybe for the WNBA. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was something significant, something that I imagine Caitlin Clark would have been in bed for by 8 o'clock. And Angel Reese showed up at the Met Gala looking like $1 million in an amazing dress and amazing hair and the whole thing. And when she got heat for it, as she did, because she gets heat for literally everything.
Yeah.
Because she got heat for it, and she responded to it the day after she played in the game, played at the practice, did whatever she had to do, and did very well. And she said, essentially, this is what I do. I went to the Met Gala and killed it. Then I went to the basketball game and killed it, and deal with it. And
that's so Trumpian. That's so Trumpian.
It's like a similar kind of thing, like a complete lack of quote unquote respect for traditions, institutions. We don't. We want our athletes to be. It's like you brought up Hoosiers earlier. Like, where are the 3 passes before the shot? Where's the proper chest pass?
Exactly.
And, it's very funny that you say that about Angel Reese, because I had not thought about that at all. But they're much more. You know what it reminds me of? Speaking of Norman Mailer, I never read. I don't believe in what he said entirely about this in this essay, but he wrote another essay about Muhammad Ali at some point, and he was talking about how Muhammad Ali was the encapsulation of the 20th century because he was pure ego. And I loved that idea that the 20th century was every inch of it was a century that was sort of motivated by individual ego and people paying the price of individual ego. And I really do think that, Caitlin Clark might be what the country, what the country needs, 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 what the believes it is. But Angel Reese probably is a lot closer to what we actually are. And it's something, the fact that you bring it up as Trump, it's something that I go through quite often as being an enormous Trump hater. I mean, I can't stand Donald Trump, but in my darker moments, in my more worrisome moments, in my moments trying to figure out why he's so popular, I think to myself, he just is America all the way. To many of us, he might be the America we wish wasn't the case. But God, does he really just sort of capture in some weird, direct way every part of the American psyche? He's a perfect embodiment of it. And I think you're right that Angel Reese is in her own way that very thing. And I think she realizes it. I think she's playing a part against the Caitlin Clark, the sort of the white hat. She knows she's playing the professional wrestling heel as well.
Yeah.
The terrible thing about America, and this is, things are getting looped upon
Totally.
different layers here, but like she is just as much as Trump is an embodiment of America, but because she's a black woman, America will refuse to see it in her till the day it dies. It can look at Donald Trump and say, yes, this carnival barking, con man, professional wrestling heel is everything we are, and can look at a black woman doing the exact same thing and be like, that is the exact opposite of everything we are. So it's I hadn't thought about it before, but it adds a really interesting layer to what's already an interesting situation.
But there's the difference here that's operative seems to be that for Angel Reese, that's for herself, right? Her brand. This is this sort of in-your-face adversarial kind of. Trump has lent that to the Caitlin Clark Middle America. Like he's become. It's like Jesus. He's the vicarious savior, right? He's taken that sort of the WWE, the adversarial energy, the commodified personality, and said, "I'm for you." Right, like it's like when the cool kid, at the lunch table, or the cool kid at school sits down with the nobodies at lunch, right? And they're a franchise. So I think what's very interesting is Trump has, I mean, what's so great, they came out with the Trump Bible, and nobody laughed at this, right? I mean, it's really being sold, right? And it's kind of, I mean, these kinds of things that are so awkward that Trump, takes this sort of adversarial in your face thing and says, I'm for you. I'm for the people that can't compete in the gladiatorial arena of sort of, I'm not for these $75,000 galas and I remember when AOC went to, was it last year when she went to the Met Gala and had that dress and she said tax the poor on the back of this ostentatious nightgown, and no one laughed. Right. Again, right. It's one of these things that no one finds. You couldn't write something like this on Saturday Night Live, right? And Trump says all of that stuff that we find. I'm from the celebrity culture, but I'm not of it. I'm really of you, and I think that's what people, want to believe. And he somehow defends the Caitlin Clark values, even though he's just antithetical to all of them.
That's right? Where it gets so interesting. Scott, tell me what's that figure again? Who's this sort of dark Jesus figure? Who is his name? Like, you told me about this person in the Bible who prefigures the coming of Christ because he's so evil that he presages the second coming. I forget his
the name. Antichrist. The Antichrist.
Yeah, no, not the Antichrist, but he has a specific name of
the law.
Like Zoroaster or something like that. You've told me about him, and that people on the far. You've even sent me articles about it.
Cyrus. Yeah.
Tell us about Cyrus a little bit.
So this is I was the first person. This is so egotistical, right? Like, but I just people were asking me, why do evangelicals love Trump? And I said, he's their Cyrus. They said, what do you mean? Well, Cyrus is this Persian king who, Israel goes into exile by Babylon, right? I mean, through the Babylonians, first the northern kingdom, then the southern kingdom. Then in like the 6th century BC, BCE now, I guess we have to say, that Babylon falls to the Persians. And the Persians have a very different sort of imperial project. They're kind of like, rather than try to break the spirit, just have them do tribute and just let them go back and worship their own gods and stuff. That's fine. So they let Israel go back to the land, right? They let them go back to what's modern day Israel. And the prophet Isaiah kind of celebrates Cyrus as this sort of pagan king that is actually God's pulling the strings of, you know, and I'm sure he does pagan things that Jews at the time found offensive, and you know, all sort of depravity, but he's our pagan, right? And I think that's sort of how evangelicals look at Trump. Like, we know he's a piece of shit, but he's our piece of shit, right? He's who God has raised up, you know, because Hollywood and all the LGBTQ and the elites and the Alec Baldwins and the this and the that, they all hate us, right? And they all think that we're lesser than. And Trump's been in that world, and he's for us, you know, and he's bringing us out of exile and bringing us back into the promised land. There's a prominence now into we'll be players in the American landscape again, right? We're no longer in exile. We're heading back to the promised land that is kind of white America.
No, that's really a great counter narrative, because I guess I'm trying to think of how to build on it. There's so many points to take, and you guys can tell me when, you know, at what point we have to wind up. But I think, to me, we were onto something very interesting that, like, first of all, Trump makes manifest that he has contempt for, say, well, I'm going to have the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, which is a horrible city. You know, like, he just comes out and says it, you know, and then.
Do you remember, David, when the first campaign that Trump's kids had this idea? I don't think they ever went through that, but they basically had this idea that they were going to start in Middle America a nice glitzy hotel chain, because they were going on these rallies and they were all dumps, and they couldn't stand staying at these like Days Inn, at the Hilton Express, and they just couldn't be in these glitzy places, right? Like, they loathe the culture that they're gladiatorial advocates for, right?
Exactly.
Nobody at the being advocate cares that they hate it.
That's the paradox I still haven't solved. I try to solve it in this book, How We Got Here. I'm not sure I do. I try and raise these questions, but to me, I guess we've already talked about this, but to me, what's interesting, if we can grant a little bit of my premise, which is that Angel Reese is Trumpian, or Trump is Angel Reese, and if Trump were to watch videos, which he's probably seen because he has, you know, he spends all day watching TV, of Angel Reese giving a press conference, and Caitlin Clark with her rather, as Josh said, you know, she's rather, everything that she says seems very vetted by all of her managerial staff. She has tens of millions of dollars on the line, and she's, as Josh has also said, a bit of an idiot savant who was raised from the crib to become, you know, a great college, high school pro basketball player. And so my premise is that, you know, there is something hilariously and fascinatingly, performatively, manically, magically Trumpian about Angel Reese, whose entire brand, as it were, is to say shit you're not supposed to say. Like, she is always saying stuff, and she's just always breaking the taboo. Always, it's like her entire brand. I mean, it's different, of course, coming from a young black woman versus a 77-year-old white multimillionaire. But I think where it gets interesting for me, or at least to me gets a little more interesting, and I'm not still figuring out the paradox and contradiction of it, but basically what's fascinating to me is Angel Reese as Trump says that he's going to rescue Middle America, who's Caitlin Clark. So it's basically Trump, a la Angel Reese, is going to rescue the captive female, or the, you know, there's this very strong narrative in Puritan America of the, you know, trying to rescue the white captured female Puritan from Native American capture. And so to me, what's interesting is that Trump, as Angel Reese, transgressive taboo breaker, is going to come in and give voice, as it were, to that huge swath of Middle America from Pittsburgh to Missoula, in which Iowa is dead center of that. I mean, almost literally dead center of it. And we're just imposing in our stupid white male, middle-aged, middle-class ways, but all these projections, but it is the way it gets read in the culture. And it's some of what the narrative is. Everyone tries to have their hot take, Stephen A. Smith and Bill Maher and everyone on the right and left and middle and center. But basically, I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but not only is Angel Reese somewhat Trumpian in her violation of all norms at all times, on the court, in her dress, social media, press conference, everything. And that's part of what makes her interesting. You don't know what she's going to say or do next, which is precisely Trump's appeal. Then he's going to rescue, you might call it the Caitlin Clark in all of us. He's going to give us, as Scott said, voice to this lost middle America. And I don't know if I'm just saying what we've said before, but to me, what's so hilarious is that the political wires are really at cross purposes. And then somewhere in here, Josh, is Cameron Brink, who's this weird outlier in all this. And I don't know if we can get to Cameron Brink in a second, but I don't know if you guys agree with my rather tortured
I love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, it might take some thinking over in terms of agreement or not agreement. It's just it sparkles. It's I hadn't thought about it that way before, and it makes it so complicated, because when you think about the kinds of people that in a perfect world should be simpatico and should be sort of bedfellows, I think you're right. I think if you got Trump to speak honestly and he wasn't running for office, he would probably say, "I love Angel Reese. I think she's great. She speaks her mind. She knows how to sell herself. She knows how to make money. She knows how to look good. The whole thing." I think someone like Trump would probably look at her. I mean, his long-standing, lifelong racism aside, right. I think that even his racism, when we're prioritizing things, I think even his racism takes a backseat to the admiration Trump probably feels for people of that ilk. In as much as he could.
And then how about the rescue part, where he is rescuing tongue-tied, lost, voiceless, featureless, white-bread America, which could hardly be more Caitlin Clark. Of course, it's different that she's a multimillionaire. She has crazy talents as a shooter. She is Jimmy Chitwood, like 100% from Hoosiers, who is interesting. Of course, the reason his name is Jimmy Chitwood is that's JC. Jimmy Chitwood is a direct Christ figure in Hoosiers. And so Caitlin Clark is Jimmy Chitwood. And so, like, is there anything to the second part of my analogy, which is, again, Angel Reese is Trump? Is Caitlin Clark weirdly, I mean, she's kind of, I don't know. Caitlin Clark is weirdly like Biden-esque to me, but she's also Trump's, like, I don't know. I can't quite figure it out, but there's this weird thing in which the wrong person is rescuing the wrong person, and it's just too interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's something to that Trump, where a certain part of the country with a certain kind of conservative values and evangelical values and stuff, they can celebrate, as you said, like it's hard for them to see it in a black woman, but they can celebrate in Trump. And also they can celebrate, I think, the offensiveness, even though they might say, I wish he wouldn't have said that, but because they feel silenced, right? And I wish he maybe wouldn't have made fun of the handicapped person, but see, that silencing, we're being silenced, and the left silencing him like they silence us, right?
Right.
And so there's this permission giving for him, because I think it's for the people he's vicariously advocating for. It's like he's punching the bully, right? And so when Trump is transgressive and says these things that are, whether again it's making fun of somebody with palsy or the racist tropes or the other things, it can be celebrated as righteous because he's punching a bully. He really is. And our defender might not be perfect, but we're being bullied here, right? And we need somebody that can punch the bully. And so there could be a celebration of his transgressiveness in a way that when it comes in the form of Angel Reese, it seems because she's the bully. She's the one that she's in the gala thing, and she's with the queer people and everybody that there's no space for us anymore, for the white sort of, we're being bullied.
I think, Josh, you want to, I have we haven't talked yet about Caitlin Clark being rejected from the WNBA team or the Olympic team,
the Olympic team,
Olympic team. There was and again, this fits in a lot of what Scott was saying, which is there was a sense that she was, people would have watched more of. It was pretty clear to me that a lot of the women on the team, including especially Diana Taurasi, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
I think it's Taurasi, yeah.
Taurasi, who a lot of the women on their team are much older. They're more experienced. They're veterans, and there's understandable resentment, jealousy, envy, and a bit of sexual orientation, culture clash between these older, experienced players. Including what is the woman who's the center on the Liberty?
Is that Ionesco?
No, she used to play on the Storm. Stewart.
Oh, Breanna Stewart.
Yeah, Breanna Stewart, and there's we don't. It was pretty explicit, I think, that we don't want her on the team. Maybe she wasn't quite ready to play. Maybe she was, but there was kind of a sense of that she needs to earn her stripes. And I don't know. I don't really have any brilliant analysis of it other than I don't know the roster well enough to know whether or not she was ready to play on the team or not. But I do think what continues to interest me about Clark is that, and again, I'm interested in this tongue-tiedness or this not knowing what to say, trying to hide underneath the mask of silence, wanting her play to speak for itself, where she knew what was going on, that she was sort of snubbed because there was resentment, there was jealousy. There was also a sense of a lot of the players on the team just said that if she's on the team, that we won't be on the team, apparently.
And really?
So, yeah.
It went that far.
I mean, such are the rumors I've heard from the sports writers. I know. I mean, I can't confirm it independently, but in any case, there was explicit that they asked that she not be on the team. That much I think is clear. They kind of almost as I think a request / strong plea or demand, and that she was left off the team. And I think, as Scott says, it kind of plays to this white audience, which is why people are watching the game. It plays as, what you call it, almost white replacement theory. I do think that's what people plug into, is that, average middle American, straight, middle class, middle-aged white people from Iowa, that were being replaced by, Black people, by people of different sexual orientations. And so I don't know. It's just so fascinating how there's nothing that happens. Somebody trips on the court. Somebody, it becomes this endless commentary. I was watching an NBA game and somebody just tripped over somebody else. And then the commentator, I think it was Doris Burke, said, if that had been a foul on Caitlin Clark, there would have been, a big huzzah. And I think, I don't know what I'm saying other than it's become this weird empty space into which we all pour our confusion about race, sex. I mean, that's kind of a given. And I guess the big contribution I've tried to make in my counterintuitive way is how much Caitlin Clark, who seems to be a meme for middle America, is actually, to me, rather like Biden in her fear of what she can and can't say. And Reese, even though she's a meme for Black America is rather like Trump. And I think, I don't know what more we can say to build this conversation other than, I don't know, sort of what it tells us about the election. Also, like that we're just, I mean, we don't know these people. I've never met them. I've watched glimmers of them here and there. And I think what's so weird and so awful is how utterly imprisoned they are by these tropes. I don't know how any of them ever break out of their tropes. Kennedy Carter, Cameron Brink, Angel Reese, and Caitlin Clark. I mean, I don't see how they ever achieve three-dimensional complexity because they are so wrapped up in a media concoction of which maybe that we're contributing to. But I guess I'm trying to complicate it a little bit by saying, look at how utterly contradictory these human beings are. In that what they seem to represent is actually different from how they perform. And anyway, blah, blah, blah.
I like this, though, Caitlin Clark as Biden kind of idea, because I have some Republican friends who voted for Hillary and then voted for Biden again. And these are pretty conservative folks, but they voted for Biden because they wanted a return to business as usual. They wanted they wanted the milk toasty. They wanted and one of the people I'm thinking of in particular is going to vote for Trump. And the whole thing is this betrayal, this sense that Biden was going to be the milk toasty thing. And yet he's gotten all the Angel Reese's in with them, right? He's governing like a left of center guy. He's governing, that's their perspective.
Is that true? I see.
Yeah. I mean, that's their perspective.
Right,
all the trillions of dollars. He's not strong enough on Israel. He's not this and that.
Yeah.
That he's betrayed them, their trust, right? That they went over and voted for this milk toasty guy, and yet around him are all these, in their perception, the in-your-face adversarial cultural left that bullies them, right? And so I think there's a real sense of betrayal here, and then driving them into the arms of the protector, of the cultural advocate, of the avenger.
So, see, Josh, I don't know how any of this relates to your book or to my book or toward, I think for some reason I was struck by, I don't know, forget who I was telling this to, but do you guys ever listen to this show called The New Yorker Radio Hour? It's like sort of like this podcast. I don't know. I just somehow hear it on the West Coast where basically David Remnick was hosting, he kind of hosts 3 or 4 people on the show who maybe have had an article in the magazine. And he'll just talk to somebody who has had an article in the magazine that might be of greater cultural interest that week. And so for some reason, I just happened to be, I think I was driving around and I happened to be listening to it a few weeks ago. And he had on Emily Nussbaum, who's a TV critic for The New Yorker, or had been. And I guess she's written a book on reality TV. And maybe the book is specifically about, I think, a show called Love is Blind. Anyway, perhaps she published an excerpt from the book on Love is Blind in the magazine. And anyway, I haven't read the book, and I must admit I haven't read the article either, but I do know Emily Nussbaum's work, and I think she is a good cultural critic, good TV critic who uses TV often as a way to understand stuff about the culture. And I am interested in reality TV as a phenomenon. And obviously Trump is a reality TV phenomenon, as is totally the Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, Cameron Brink, Kennedy Carter. It's a really like just unfolding drama involving their college coaches, their boyfriends, their managers. It's become virtually a reality TV show. But there was this moment, I don't know why, it just might be me, or living on the West Coast now, but there was this terrible condescension or patronization or incomprehension I felt on David Remnick's part, the editor of The New Yorker, who was just being, I thought, terribly condescending to the critic, Emily Nussbaum, who's trying to, I think there's a generational difference, I believe, between Remnick and Nussbaum. And she was trying to explain to him the immense hold that reality TV has on a generation of people, say 45 years and younger, and especially people, say 18 to 35. And he was talking about, well, the New Yorker and the New York Times have editorial standards for how you do the edit of a particular document, and that when we go to reality TV, that we're really, of course, the edit, big surprise, is highly subjective and very narratively driven, which we all know and have known for 40 years. But to me, there was something in the way that he was patronizing any culture outside of this tiny bubble of, the Upper West Side. And I just felt in that moment, I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but I felt like I got the Trump voter, because I felt such seething anger toward his patronization. I mean, this probably is, going to kill my attempt to excerpt this book in the New Yorker, but I don't care. That ship has long since sailed. And I think it was sort of like, I felt like I was just pounding the steering wheel with rage. I mean, again, I watch almost no reality TV, to be honest, but a chapter of my book, Reality Hunger, is on reality TV. And my daughter, who's 31 and lives in Brooklyn, watches it and finds it utterly fascinating as a cultural window. And it is the lingua franca of the culture. And the way in which Remnick, I felt, patronized not only his own reporter or critic, but he really did not seem to understand that the organizing frame of the culture was not the New York Times or certainly the New Yorker magazine, but and he was saying, well, what effects does reality TV have on anything? She was like, are you kidding? Like,
Right.
do you have any idea the degree at which everyone's whole frame of reality, from dating sites to dating apps to the way in which people talk, everything? And again, I don't pretend to be plugged into it, but in that moment, I started just screaming in the car, because I'm like, I would think I was saying, like, this is why Trump's going to win, because I just felt like you just don't get it. It's very much like Hillary saying basket of deplorables. Like, at that point, the election was over. And I felt like, which is easy to say now, and I felt like, I don't know how to connect this to this stuff, but it's related. I can't quite put it together now, but it has to. I don't know. Can you guys connect the
Well,
dots?
it's funny you're saying that, because when you were telling that story, I had a similar David Remnick story where I wanted to pull my hair out, but it was actually kind of in the opposite direction, and it blurs the lines even further in terms of, like, I think, probably in the culture we want to believe that there's one strain of thought that's the sort of right-wing strain, and another strain of thought that's the left-wing strain,
right?
And never shall the twain meet. But the fact, like what you're talking about, there is a New Yorker, whatever, New York Times, sort of slightly left of center, political strain, intellectual political strain, sort of embodied by someone like David Remnick.
Totally.
That in your case, I like wanting to pull your hair out and making you understand why it would why this was a signal as to why Trump is in the position of power that he's in. When I saw David Remnick speak, I felt the exact opposite, in that it struck me as being extremely smug, sort of Clintonian white power structure liberalism, ignoring ignoring what makes the left wing, what makes the progressive wing. And he was hosting. I went to a presentation given at the New Yorker Festival here in New York, and he was hosting. I don't know why we went to this one, but my wife and I went to this one discussion about New Jersey writers, and it was David Remnick from New Jersey, and it was David Chase, who created The Sopranos, and it was another two, I think, upper middle-aged white men from New Jersey who had written novels, and Juno Diaz, who is Dominican, but had obviously written many books about his experience growing up Dominican in New Jersey. And they're doing this discussion, and they're going back and forth on the whole thing. And at some point, David Remnick goes, it would be impossible. I'd like now to talk about a new topic. It would be impossible for us to sit here and talk about what it was like growing up in New Jersey without talking about the boss, Bruce Springsteen. And Juno Diaz kind of turns to himself and goes, but he has a microphone on. He goes, I could do it. And the whole crowd was like, there was this great moment where it's like,
Are you fucking kidding me?
Your white male perspective on what it is to be Jersey is not the only perspective on what.
I mean, to me that's a real litmus. How much I despise Springsteen, and I think you might as well talk about Billy Joel next. I mean, that's unbelievable. He said that without irony.
Completely without irony, because I think that in his world, like, you would say, "Oh, you're from Jersey. Let's talk about Springsteen," you know. And like, if you grew up Dominican in New Jersey, Bruce Springsteen might not mean shit to you.
Exactly.
But it was a shining moment. It just kind of sat there because everyone laughed. It just sat there as like your very privileged perspective on the world is not the only perspective,
and also incredibly low middle brow. I mean, Bruce Springsteen means like zero to me. So like, I mean,
by the way, as a kid who grew up in New Jersey,
I know
where with parents that didn't go to college, blue collar.
You love Springsteen.
Oh yeah, that was highbrow for me, Springsteen.
Well, I like, very early,
sophisticated.
I know, like very early Springsteen, like through Nebraska, it was okay. But I mean, now he's just like utter self-parody. But in any case, I'm trying to think of what it is, because to me, what Josh's incredible story and my story are, even though they're seemingly different, they are sort of the same narrative, even though as they're 180, they're kind of the same narrative, and smugness is what connects them. This terrible, unbelievable provincialism of New York, which drives me absolutely insane. And I think, what's my point? Like, how does this connect? I don't know. We're going to have to really struggle to connect it back to Cameron.
Well, if I may give it a shot, and it relates back to what you were saying, and also
you're going to win.
We'll see if I can pull this off, but it also relates to something Scott was saying about. But both of you were talking about in terms of that Trump is both that, and to Trump voters, it's both. Because when you were Scott, you were talking about Trump as being a defender against, he takes on the bully for these people. Obviously, my first instinct as a progressive person in this world was I wanted to get up on my crate and say, he's the bully. He's bullying against these people.
Of course, yeah.
And to me, that's obvious. And to a lot of people, of course, he's a bully because he takes on people that are marginalized or don't have nearly the amount of power that he does. But I understood what you were saying about, to a certain swath of the country, that he is actually the guy who stands up against bullies. So this idea that we have, and what you were talking about as well, David, about him, that it's Angel Reese, that the Trumpian figure, and Caitlin Clark being the Biden-esque figure, that like it's getting into sort of like complicated wall of mirrors here. But one thing that I thought about, that because at some point I'd written down somewhere, as a note. I mean, thank God it wasn't a finished thought, but I had written down somewhere as a very common thought that Caitlin Clark represents yet another in a long line of great white hopes in American sports. Whether it's Jim Jeffries fighting Jack Johnson, all the way up to Jerry Cooney fighting, was it Muhammad Ali or whoever it was?
Yeah.
Whoever. No, it was who knocked out Muhammad Ali and felt terrible about it. The next great heavyweight after Muhammad Ali from
Frazier?
No, from Pennsylvania. I'm going to forget his name. Larry Holmes.
Right.
And Larry Holmes was I think it was Jerry Cooney. It was one of these great white hopes. And the story was that, white America was entirely in Cooney's corner. And even that Ronald Reagan called Cooney to wish him luck. But so you have a whole, American history. I mean, every time there's a white basketball player, that's any good, suddenly basketball becomes more popular. Whatever it is, it wasn't an original thought to think that Caitlin Clark would be a great white hope.
Right.
But it suddenly struck me that if we're dealing with all these paradoxes, is that she's not really a great white hope, or if she is a great white hope, she's a great white hope via being a great white victim. Like, the image that keeps getting created about Caitlin Clark, which I imagine probably to as we've talked about before, sort of a basketball obsessed competitive person who's done nothing with their lives except play sports probably bothers her more than anything. The idea that she would be considered weak, that she would be considered
Right.
a victim, that she would be in need of protection, that when she gets shoulder checked by Kennedy Carter, and gets knocked to the ground, I'm sure, I'm absolutely sure that Caitlin Clark thought to herself, that bitch just knocked me down. I'm going to go score a point against her.
Yeah.
She didn't think to herself, I'm hurt, help me. And yet the image that has been propagated more than any of the other images that have been propagated by the right wing about Caitlin Clark is that she's being victimized and that she is in need of protection. So this idea that what is manifested, it's like a combination of two strains that have existed in America probably since the beginning of America. That you have the Great White Hope strain, and then you have the sanctity of white womanhood that is constantly in need of protection, and whose protection justifies any kind of behavior that we want to perform. So the Ku Klux Klan can string up any number of black men during Jim Crow if it's believed that the sanctity of white womanhood has been endangered at all. So you've got these two threads that are going here with her, that she's both the symbol of white greatness and white ability, and a new white, like if white people are just given a chance, they could achieve these great things. And on the same strain, she is the embodiment of this notion that white women need to be protected at all costs from anything that could mangle or endanger their sweet womanhood, whether it's a black man who might whistle at them in a supermarket, or as has been shown countless times throughout American history or the last 150 years of American history, that women have been playing sports. Every time a black woman starts to do well in sports, the first thing she's criticized for is her body being too masculine, that it's essentially that their very physical existence is an unfair advantage over white women, and therefore is a danger to white women. So if we're going to be stacking paradoxes on paradoxes, I just want to add that the Great White Hope meets the victimized white woman in Caitlin Clark and exists in some strange liminal space. I don't know what it is, but I think there's something there.
To me, what's interesting is recently Irvin Magic Johnson suggested that Caitlin Clark should call Larry Bird, who's from Indiana, a nearby state of Iowa. I think he still lives in Indiana. And, he was called the Hick from French Lick, Indiana. And he and Magic, of course, entered the NBA in '79. And he immediately, he was a rookie for the Celtics. And they said, okay, Rook, you're going to carry our bags. And he goes, that ain't happening. From the very beginning, he had a certain badass attitude, which apparently carried over onto the court, was like the world's worst trash talker, had so much attitude, told Julius Erving was guarding Bird, and he told Charles Barkley, get this old man off of me, because there's no point in this old man trying to guard me. And, he just had so much attitude. And even though Larry Bird was like the Hick from French Lick, he had so much attitude. He was totally badass. And he was like, he and Magic were just, as it were, magical together, because he was so square, and he so loved himself. He was cool. And like, what's so interesting about Caitlin Clark is she's unbelievably square. Like she has zero cool factor ever. And I think even the way that she presents herself, she with a ponytail, and often she'll wear a dress or a quasi dress as she comes into the arena, and she's as they say, she's attractive but not too attractive. She's like, everything is right in the middle or dead center of American presentation. And I think her squareness is so interesting. And I think, what's my point? I'm still trying to connect it back to Remnick and to Springsteen, who's about as square as it gets, and Remnick, who's about as square as it gets, and like Emily Nussbaum was trying to say there's this new world of reality TV in which someone like Angel Reese is rather brilliantly performing a role. And like, this is so much the prism through which that we view reality. And I don't know, Scott, because you're kind of coming at this from an askew angle, because you're not a sports fan, I don't think, hugely, and I hope you weren't upset by me telling you that Sixers story, because where Larry Bird
Oh
was
yeah,
not
yeah.
in the
No,
Sixers. I don't know if
yeah,
you were upset about that one, but
no, not at all. I'm more of an Eagles fan than a Phillies fan than a
can you
Sixers
connect
fan.
it back to, well, even the whole Eagles thing with, with Jalen Hurts, and can he be smart enough to play quarterback? That's an old trope, of course, in football. Can the black quarterback, blah, blah, blah. But what's my point? I don't know. I guess we've already done our thing, but to me, what Angel Reese does is she cuts through the fucking noise, and like she just cuts through, and like Caitlin Clark is performing this immaculate old-fashioned white skill, which to me was like, that's like, I spent 12 hours a day playing basketball as a kid. I was short, small, slow, but I could shoot like crazy, and I could just I just sort of tapped out toward the end of high school. I just didn't have the skills, but I could shoot. And I think she has this one tiny, in a way, I mean, she's a good enough athlete that she can play in the pros, but she kind of has this one skill, and I'm trying to connect it back. Can you, Scott, to what we were trying to get to vis-a-vis coastal elites, condescension, and what somehow Clark, basically, I'll be Angel Reese and I'll rescue you from cultural condescension, because in my taboo breaking, I'll rescue the Caitlin Clarks of Middle America. I guess that's our
Yeah,
basic
but
narrative.
something that Josh said is interesting. The victim, right? Who she's an athlete that's not going to want to be a victim, right? And
No,
is going to want to throw shoulders. But you have to be a victim to be in the political cultural narrative, right? So this is what's interesting to me. For instance, in this election cycle, right? Everyone's the victim, right? So the progressive friends, if Trump gets elected, it's going to be fascist. They're going to be lined up. Robert De Niro will never be able to speak again. Everybody, this is and for the Trump supporters, that they're the victims, right? If progressives win again, there'll be no country left. The Constitution will be on a roll in bathrooms. Everything's going to be, everything of our values will be so. In this, everyone has to be there's an apocalypticism of everything, right? And everyone's a victim, and whoever wins the culture war is going to victimize everybody else. So it's just interesting. You have to, in this kind of culture war, everybody has to be victimized, right? So you have to take someone like Caitlin Clark, and in the narrative, she has to be victimized, right? To represent the sort of encroachment on this sacred space that's now going to be sort of annexed and
and Reese,
colonized.
how is Angel Reese a victim in the sense? Well, she's a black woman from I don't know her background.
No, see, she is, she maybe not, she might be outside of it, but I think that the progressives just see that if Trump takes office, if the MAGA people win, that everything they're about will just be destroyed. I mean, there's this talk as though the country will be, it's over, right? I mean, there's an end. It's not just a bad, it's going to be a bad 4 years or this or that, or this. It's a kind of, it's just, they'll be the victimized ones. But Angel Reese represents that sort of in your face thing that I think that the cultural right sort of wants to stand against, right? These people that mock us and don't understand us and get in our face, that they'll get their comeuppance when we take the country back. Right.
Somehow I couldn't follow. It was interesting. I couldn't follow all of your pronouns, which was probably to the point. I couldn't follow who was afraid of whom, which is kind of the point of current American culture. And I think anyway, I don't know if we're starting to run out of steam. If anything to say, to add.
Well, I will say this, just on and this relates back to what I've been reading and studying and writing about for a long time with Lewis and Schmeling, and that they were used as proxies for issues that they either weren't concerned about, had no interest in, had nothing to say about,
and became friends, right? They were sort of friendly.
Yeah. And that's sort of like the fate of athletes to a certain extent. They're not the first, they won't be the last. The interesting thing about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese in this particular context, and particularly what we're talking about right now, and this sort of race to the bottom in terms of who wants to be the bigger victim,
Yeah.
whether it's Trump, whether, because Trump is always claiming to be a victim too. I mean,
Totally.
how successful can you be and still claim to be a victim? And then his people claim to be victim, and then if you're on that side, you look at progressives, and they're always claiming to be victims. The only ones who have never, ever, ever said I'm a victim in this are Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Like the people that choose to make them victims are the ones who are going to be using them for political desire X, Y, and Z. I've never heard Angel Reese say anything that wasn't extremely confident to the point of arrogance. I've never heard Caitlin Clark say anything beyond like the classic, the classic Bull Durham, I'm going to go out there and give 110% to the club pablum speech.
Right.
So never once has either of them said anything about being a victim. But if there's anything that political people truly know, is that you turn people who aren't victims into victims, and that serves your purposes.
That's a wonderful point to end on, because they are these relatively empty, I mean, they're complex, three-dimensional human beings that we don't know, so that we, in our, mediated landscape, project all these things. And, the three of us have tried to do a decent job of unpacking some of the contradictions, and we're projecting our own things onto them. I mean, I think that's a wonderful place to end, that where they're just fictions, to us, they don't know. And people pointed that out, like maybe your book on Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, or my book on on Gary Payton. Or I remember I mean, a little bit of a product placement was like, I showed my movie about Marshawn Lynch. I showed it in Oakland 4 or 5 years ago, and Marshawn came up to me afterward, and he had already seen it, but I had sent him a Vimeo link. But anyway, he just said, I wanted to, let's see, how did he said? He says, I wanted to hate on you, but I couldn't, because you did a damn good job with it, which I just thought was, I mean, obviously that was a nice thing to say, but to me, it was kind of like, that captured it perfectly. Like, how dare you, this middle-aged or late middle-aged, middle-class white man professor, make a movie about me based on your perceptions. I have every reason to hate you for it. I just assumed I would hate the movie. But to his surprise and sort of bafflement, he said, I actually thought you did a good job with it, which obviously I was just happy for. But it was like, how dare I do that? And he kind of said, like, okay, but you did a halfway decent job of imagining the stuff I feel. And I'm like, it's like the most important thing anyone's ever said to me about my work. I was like so moved. Obviously, I'm bragging about it now, but like, as we're talking about this stuff, we're just trying to, I don't know if our guesses make any sense. I don't know. You wonder what reason Clark would make of our blather. I don't think we're trying, that took me 5 years to make the movie. I thought for 5 years about Lynch, and you've been working on your book, Josh, for years. And so, I just think that we did a decent job, I think, of complicating the issues. I mean, everyone and their brother and sister has a take on this, but I thought we did a decent job of just saying, like, this stuff is so damn confusing and so complicated and so richly revealing of all of us, I think.
Well, David, you really stirred the pot with that Angel Reese's Trumpian figure. That was the real
amazing.
That was so fun, you guys. I don't know what happens now. Do we post it or something?
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks, both of you. This will be this was a great conversation. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks a lot, everybody.